So here's a step-by-step guide on getting started with your first video game. What you see on the screen now is what we're going to be making through this mini-series. It's really simple and arcadey, but it's always easy to add more gameplay elements and cooler graphics at a later point. Right now, let's just jump into it. So let's begin by installing Unity. If you've already done so, you can just skip ahead in the video. First, we need to go to unity3d.com. When we're here, we're going to click Get Unity Now, and we can see all of the different versions of Unity. Unless you're a really experienced developer and working in a team, I definitely just recommend the personal version. You can see that it comes with all engine features, all platforms, updates, and it's totally royalty free, so you can use it even to create commercial games. The other stuff here is mostly some in the cloud features and of course the ability to customize your splash screen. So let's go ahead and hit download now. Let's also download the installer, and this should be very similar on both Windows and Mac. Go ahead and open the file you just downloaded, select yes, and then we can just skip through the installer. I'm going to choose 64-bit. If you're on a newer computer, you should do the same. And this here is really neat. This allows you to customize what parts of Unity that you want to download, because Unity might be fairly large. I recommend you download Unity, the documentation, the standard assets. If you're on a Windows, definitely check off Microsoft Visual Studio Tools for Unity. This will give you a much better text editor. Then you can of course choose the platforms that you want to export to. I'm just going to select Mac and WebGL. We'll just go next, choose a folder to install to, and it's going to download Unity and install for you. That took a while. Let's hit finish. So as you can see, I'm using Unity 5.5, which is currently the newest version, but don't worry, Unity rarely changes things really dramatically. So now we can just hit new to create a new project. And a Unity project is basically just a place to host all of our code and asset. It's pretty much our entire game before we build it. Let's give it a name. And here you can decide whether you want to build a 3D or 2D game. However, this is pretty much just going to change the few settings inside of Unity that we can change at a later point really easily. So this decision here doesn't matter too much. For now, let's just keep it at 3D. Let's pick a location for our project and hit create. So here's what Unity looks like right when you open it up. You'll notice that I have a dark skin for Unity. That's because I'm using a paid version. But other than the color of the editor, that's not going to make any difference throughout these videos. So let's begin by exploring the user interface. So in the middle here, we have this scene view. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You can use the middle mouse button to pan around. And if we hold down Alt and left click, we can then pivot around the center of our view. Over here, we have the hierarchy. This displays all of the different game objects that we have in our scene. You can see here our scene is currently untitled, and it has two game objects, the main camera and the directional light. Notice that when I click on an object, say the main camera, the inspector will display properties for that object. Each one of these collapsible things here are called components. Components are what makes objects do different things, but we'll get into that in a second. We also have the project panel down here, which shows all of our different game assets that we can then drag into our scene, making them appear in the hierarchy. You can totally rearrange Unity in any way that you would like and drag around panels and really go crazy with this, but remember, you can always go to the top right corner and select default, and it's going to reopen to the default layout. And any window you don't already have open, you can go to window and select it from here. So let's start building our game. First off, we want to create a ground plane for our player to stand on. To do that, let's go over to the hierarchy, right click. You can also go under create and select 3D object cube. This spawns a new cube into our scene. Again, we can use the movement controls to have a look at it, and we can always quickly focus on it by hovering over the scene view, selecting it and hitting F. Now the cube currently is somewhere in our scene and it's really hard to get a look at where. So what we'll do is just go over to the transform here, right click and hit reset. And that just centers it. You can see the position is now 0 on the X, 0 on the Y, and 0 on the Z, and gives it a scale of 1 by 1 by 1. Again, hit F to focus on it. So if we go into our game view, we can now see our cube through our camera. If we want, we can take our game view here and dock it to the right so that we can see both our scene and the game view at the same time. Then we can take our camera here and we can readjust its position, and you can see that updating in real time. I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. I'm then going to select the cube and scale it up. Let's give it a scale of 15 on the X. We keep it at 1 on the Y and give it say 100 on the Z. If we zoom out now, we can see just how huge this ground plane is. We can then go and rename it to ground. And we can simply drag on the blue arrow here to move it over. Something like that, just so it starts about at the same point as our camera. Then let's create another object. So right click, go 3D object and then cube. Again, let's reset the transform so it's centered on our scene. We can then drag on this green arrow to move it up. Let's again hit F to focus on it. And we can see that we now have our new cube here standing on the ground. This cube is going to be our player. So let's go ahead and rename him to player. And let's also make him a bit more visible, because right now everything is pretty boring white. To do that, we need to assign a material to our player. And we create a new material in the project panel. So let's right click down here, go create, and then material. We'll name this material our player and then mat for material, but that's optional. Let's hit enter. Now we can adjust different properties on this material, stuff like how metallic it should be, the smoothness of the material, and the color up here. So we'll make this some kind of bright red. And what we can do is then simply drag our player mat onto our cube, and you can see it updating in real time. We'll simply let go and it's applied. And any changes that we now make to this material are going to update for our player. I think our camera is a bit far away, so let's also select our camera and move it a bit closer. Again, we can move it over by simply dragging on this arrow, move it up a little bit, and that looks a lot better. So now if we were to hit play and actually run our game, not much happens. That's mostly because we haven't done any programming yet, and so we can't really control the player, but we also need to add some physics into our game. Right now, if we exit play mode, take our player, drag him up here, and hit play again, he's just going to float in the air. He's not falling down. The reason why is that we need to tell this game object to interact with the Unity physics system. To do that, we go out of play mode and add a new component. In our case, we want to add the physics rigid body component. Now when we hit play, we should see that our cube falls to the ground, and indeed it does. Right now it falls in a bit boring way, so let's try and rotate our cube a bit to make it more interesting. To do that, we switch to the rotation tool. Notice how all of the different tools are up here. Right now we have the move tool selected. We can also shift to rotation, scale, and then this one is for manipulating 2D graphics, which allows you to easily do all of the different things at the same time. You can always switch between these really quickly by using Q, W, E, R, and T. So we're going to press E to rotate, and I'm just going to kind of rotate it in a random way here. So if we now hit play, he's going to fall down, and we can now see that he has a lot more advanced physics applied than we were able to see before. So I'm just going to undo that rotation by pressing Ctrl Z, and I'm also going to move him down here. We can also try duplicating him. So let's press Ctrl D to duplicate, and let's move this one up and over a bit and see how they interact with each other. Awesome. So one really important thing to understand is what is making these objects behave this way. And the answer is, of course, components. So if we now exit out of play mode and select the player here, we can see that he has all of these different components. The first one is something that you will see on all game objects called a transform component, which just keeps track of where the game object is in space, how it's rotated, and its size. You can see we can adjust all of these, and the game object will be adjusted accordingly. And also, if we go ahead and drag on the game object, you will see the transform component updating. The rest of them, though, are all optional. We have the mesh renderer down here, which is responsible for drawing the object on the screen. If we go ahead and disable that, it's actually going to disappear. It's still in here, you can see it's still in the hierarchy, and it still has this green box and we can move it around, but until we re-enable the mesh renderer, it's not going to be visible. Then of course we have the box collider. Without this, we wouldn't be able to collide with other objects. If I go ahead and disable the box collider and then hit play, this should just fall through the ground. But if we then go ahead and re-enable the box collider, you can see that it's now able to collide with everything. So remember, to get realistic physics, we both need a collider and a rigid body. And in order to see it, we need a mesh renderer. I of course skipped the mesh filter up here. That's not because it's super advanced. It's just that this is only responsible for a very simple thing, and that is choosing the shape of our object. Right now you can see it has the cube selected. We can easily go in here and change it. So we simply click on the little ball here, and we can change it to a capsule, a cylinder, a plane, a sphere, and so on. And you will notice that it's distorted, but that's just because we messed around with the scale. So we can just change that to 1, and you will notice now that it's a sphere. Of course, our box collider is still a box. So if we want this to behave like a sphere, we'll need to remove the box collider. So right click, go remove component, and instead add a sphere collider. And notice how I'm just using search here. That just makes things a lot easier. So let's just enter that. And you can see now that it has a sphere collider. So if we go ahead and hit play, it acts like a sphere. And this is of course more noticeable if we move it over so that we can see it hitting the box. And it's going to go and roll off our ground plane. Another thing is you can also adjust values while playing. We could take our player here and we're still playing and move him around. It might be a bit buggy sometimes when using the physics system, but we are able to do it. We can even go in here and say disable the ground plane or do different stuff like that. But just know that any adjustment that you make while in the game and running are going to go back as soon as you quit playing. So make sure not to do any important adjustments while playing, or at least remember your settings, or else you're just going to have lost progress. So the final thing I wanted to do is just delete the ball here and maybe make this a bit prettier by changing our skybox. To do that, we go and select our main camera. And as the skybox here, we're going to change it to solid color. And let's make the color here a very white gray. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but I think it looks pretty simplistic and cool. By the way I just maximized the game view here is something you're going to see me do a lot of times. That's by hitting Shift Space. Finally, to save your game, we can go ahead and hit Control S or Command S if you're on the Mac, or go to File, Save Scenes. Then we need to name our scene something, and scenes in Unity are basically just levels. So we'll just go ahead and call this one level 1 and hit save. You can see now that the scene appears down here in the project panel. If we had multiple scenes, we would be able to shift between them by simply double clicking to load that level up. So that was pretty much all of the handy tips that I could fit into this video. I know some things are probably really confusing, but really the best way for you to learn some of this stuff is by just messing around with it yourself. And then of course in the next video, we'll delve into some actual programming. So that was pretty much it for this video. Hit the subscribe button to be notified when a new video comes out. I upload Sundays and Wednesdays. And of course, if you're a fan of the channel, you can always support me over at Patreon, patreon.com/Brackeys. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in December, and a special thanks to Sultan Al-Sharif, Derek Hemskirk, Faisal Marifai, James Calhoun, Robert Bonham, and Jason Latito. If you want to become a patron yourself, you can do so at patreon.com/Brackeys.